All right, let's just jump right in. We all know we live in a world where the only thing you can count on is change. I mean, you spend months, maybe even a year, crafting that perfect 5 year plan for your business, and then bam, some global event, some new piece of tech, or a sudden shift in the market just blows it all up. It's so frustrating, right? The old way of planning, that traditional forecast, it just doesn't work anymore. So the real question is, how do you even begin to strategize for a future you literally can't predict? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? I think every single leader, every strategist has felt this exact pain. You build this beautiful, super detailed forecast, you've got all your data lined up, and then poof, one unpredicted thing happens and the whole thing is basically useless. It really shines a light on this huge flaw in how we've all been taught to think about what's coming next. So yeah, that is the million-dollar question. If the crystal ball is shattered, what are we supposed to use instead? Well, it turns out the answer isn't about getting better at predicting the future. It's about getting way, way better at preparing for it. And that requires a totally different mindset and a really powerful tool called scenario planning. And that brings us to the core concept here. It's all about making this huge mental shift from desperately trying to predict what's next to simply preparing for whatever might come. Scenario planning isn't about guessing the one future, it's about building the foresight to be ready for many of them. So, what is scenario planning really? Well, to put it simply, it's a way for you to explore a bunch of different but totally plausible futures. Now, the key words to hang on to here are resilient and agile. The whole point isn't to guess the one right future. Nope. The goal is to build a strategy that's so tough, so flexible, that it can succeed no matter which of those possible futures actually becomes reality. And this right here, this is the game changer. You see, traditional forecasting is always asking, what will happen? It tries to funnel you down this narrow path to a single precise outcome. But scenario planning, it just blows that whole idea up by asking a much better question. What could happen? It's all about imagination. It's about exploration. You stop betting the farm on one prediction and start preparing for a whole range of possibilities. Okay, so this all sounds amazing in theory, but how do you actually do it? Let's get down to brass tacks. We're going to walk through a really straightforward 4-step framework that any team, any organization can start using to build this kind of strategic muscle. So the whole process kicks off by looking outward. I mean, think about it. Before you can possibly plan for your own future, you have to get a handle on the huge forces that are swirling around out there. We're talking about the big picture trends that are totally outside your control, but could absolutely change the game for your business. And a fantastic way to do this is with a pestle analysis. It's a simple framework that forces you and your team to look at the world from every angle. So for example, under technological, you might identify something huge like the rise of generative AI. Now, that's not a scenario yet, that's a driving force. This exercise is all about creating a big structured list of these powerful forces that are going to become the raw ingredients for your scenarios. So here's how the framework guides you from those big ideas to a solid plan. In step 1, like we just talked about, you identify all those driving forces using something like Pestle. Then step 2 is all about focus. You take that giant list and you boil it down to the 2 forces that are the most important and the most uncertain. Then in step 3, the creative part, you use those 2 uncertainties to build 4 plausible, really distinct stories about the future. And finally, step 4 is where the rubber meets the road. You test your current strategy against each of those stories and build a flexible plan that can win no matter what. You know, here's something that's really important to remember. While you do end up with a strategic plan, the real magic, the true value, it all happens during the process itself. Just getting your team in a room to have these conversations, it challenges everyone's hidden assumptions. It builds this deep, shared understanding of your world. And it creates a culture that's actually ready to adapt on the fly. And honestly, that is priceless. Okay, let's talk about the proof. This is not just some academic theory. We're going to look at a few powerful real-world examples of how scenario planning gave some major organizations a huge advantage, especially when a crisis blew up out of nowhere. And we have to start with the classic case study, the story that really put scenario planning on the map for everyone, Royal Dutch Shell, way back in the 1970s. So back then, the entire oil industry basically operated on this one single belief, that oil prices would be stable forever. It was just accepted wisdom. But Shell's strategy team did something pretty radical. They imagined a future where that wasn't true. They actually built out a whole scenario for a future with a major oil shock. So when the 1973 oil crisis actually happened, all their competitors were caught completely flat-footed. Shell, on the other hand, they'd already thought through it. They had a playbook just sitting there ready to go. And the result was absolutely transformative. I mean, while all these other giant companies were scrambling and panicking, Shell was calmly executing their pre-planned strategies. They navigated the chaos with total confidence and came out the other side as a much, much stronger player in the industry. It was a massive strategic win, and it was all born from just being willing to imagine a different future. Okay, let's fast forward to a much more recent and, for all of us, an incredibly relatable example. Just think back to the absolute chaos of early 2020. A private university found itself facing this unprecedented uncertainty with the COVID-19 pandemic. But instead of getting paralyzed by it all, they immediately started modeling scenarios. What if classes have to stay remote? What if we can somehow bring students back to campus? For each one of these possible futures, they mapped out everything: the financial hit, the operational nightmares, the whole shebang. So when the time came to make that incredibly tough call to stay remote for the fall semester, it wasn't a panicked reaction. It was a swift, confident, strategic decision that was based on the hard work they had already done. Now for our third example. Let's look at a massive technological shift. Back in the early 2000s, Microsoft was the undisputed king of software, right? The kind you installed from a CD-ROM. But a small team deep inside the company was already thinking about what could possibly come next. Through scenario planning, they actually envisioned a future that wasn't dominated by software in a box, but by cloud computing. They saw that a company like Amazon Web Services wasn't just some niche player, it was a fundamental threat to their entire business model. And that foresight was absolutely crucial. It helped them convince leadership to make this enormous strategic pivot and pour billions into building what would eventually become Microsoft Azure, which is now a cornerstone of their entire business. All right, so we've seen the theory, we've seen the proof. Now let's bring this all home and make it super practical for you. We're going to walk through a quick and simple case study to show you exactly how you could put this whole thing into action for your own business. So let's pretend for a minute that we run a small retail chain that sells high-end, custom clothing. Our big challenge is figuring out our strategy for the next few years in a market that feels really, really volatile. So after brainstorming all the possible things that could affect us, a recession, material costs, the rise of fast fashion, we narrowed that big list down to the two most critical and unpredictable variables. First, the economy. Will people actually have money to spend? And second, consumer values. Is this focus on sustainable products going to keep growing, or is it just a passing trend? And now, this is where it all clicks together visually. We use those two big uncertainties as the axes of a simple 2x2 grid. And what this does is create four very different but equally plausible future worlds for our clothing business. We've got the ethical consumer world, right? Where everyone has money and wants sustainable stuff. Then, at the other extreme, you have survival mode, where wallets are tight and nobody cares about eco-friendly labels. Each one of these boxes is its own little story about the future. And this is the final crucial step. For each one of these four scenarios, we now have a strategic response that's ready to go. If we start seeing signs that the ethical consumer world is emerging, we double down on marketing our sustainable story. But if it starts looking more like the struggling eco-warrior, we shift our message to focus on quality and long-term value. See, we're not guessing anymore. We are prepared. We have a playbook. So I want to leave you with this question. We know for a fact that the future is and always will be uncertain. The real question you have to ask yourself is this: have you built a strategy that actually embraces that uncertainty? Or is your strategy just as fragile and unpredictable as the future itself? Scenario planning gives you the tools to build for resilience. And in the world we live in today, that might just be the greatest competitive advantage you can possibly have.